Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Garden Spot Chapel. Welcome to our Welsh Mountain series, our concluding series today. We had one last week, and this is our second one this week. Tonight, we'll be talking about religious history and mission on the Welsh Mountain. Ken Sensenig will share his stories and his historical research. If you have not gotten this paper, it was at the doors. It also lists the Plain Living educational series that's coming up. We have dates on April 4th, the 10th, and the 24th about Weaverland Mennonites, 300 Years of Growth, Division, and Faithfulness, My Journey to Plainness, and Amish Alternatives to Government Programs. So if you're interested, please come out. And there's also one on February 27th. It talks about beginning your own genealogical research. This looks very interesting. So we hope you can all continue to come out and visit with us tonight. Let's open with a word of prayer, and I will then introduce Ken Sensenig. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful world you have created for us, the ways we discover, the way we live, the way we interact with all you have created. Lord God, bring us together united in one heart with your love moving forward. We thank you for this time. We bless Ken as he shares and all others with their stories. Lord God, may the history just come to life tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. My name is Karen Nancarvis. I'm one of the campus chaplains here, and I'm delighted to welcome you tonight. There's also another handout that Paul Kelly had written. This was out last week, so if you had gotten one last week, you don't need to get another one. But if you missed last week, because we did run out, they're here, and we have them at both ends of the chapel. This is loaded with wonderful research about key newspaper articles on the Welsh Mountain. So we're grateful for that. And thank you, Paul, and to our Racial Literacy Committee for all their hard work that they've done to pull this series together in conjunction with the Historical Society. So Ken Sensenig is here. He works with MCC. He's great at telling stories, which is why we like to hear from him. He's married to Karen Sensenig, and they have 3 children that are scattered around the world. So welcome, Ken. Thank you.
Some time ago, I was speaking at Fairmount Home, and I noticed my friend Laura Zimmerman in the audience, and so I went over to Laura and said, "So Laura, how old are you now?" She said, "I'm 103 years old." That's old information. She had a birthday yesterday. Laura's 104. Someone overheard our conversation and came bustling over and said, "I want to meet this woman who's 300 years old." I said Laura's old, but I corrected and says not 300 years old. But that's basically the time frame we're looking at today. We're going to look at 300 years of history mostly, but we're going to back up a little bit before then. I learned a lot in doing this research, and I'll say right up front that I am not an expert today. You can ask questions at the end, and some of you in the audience can help you here. I'm a fellow learner. What I'm presenting is not exhaustive, and it's bounded by the time that I had, and it's bounded by the information which is available. So this is not an exhaustive study, but we will at least look at this. One interesting discovery for me is I made a new connection with my own family story to the Welsh Mountains, something I had not known. Many of you have connections to the Welsh Mountain. I'm going to just point out, simply because I have the opportunity to do so, 3 little places where my family connection is made with the Welsh Mountain. I also want to give a little bit of a caveat right here at the beginning, in that one of the challenges of talking about things from long ago is that the sensitivities and the sensibilities of what is appropriate language has evolved over the years. I have simply made the decision that the descriptors and sentiments that are no longer appropriate in the 21st century I will not use unless I'm using direct quotes, and then to be historically accurate we need to. And so I'm sensitive about that. I don't know a good answer to that, but that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about this evening. I'm going to go through this in 4 parts. The first part is the major part. It's sort of a historical overview, and we're going to literally be skipping across the tops of the mountains because there's no way that we can delve into the depth of any of this. But then I couldn't help, as I wove this story together, to see patterns emerging. So I said, I think it's essential that we put sort of an ethnographic lens over what I've just presented and look at what some of those patterns are. And then if we do that, then we should answer the questions. So what do these patterns mean for us today? And so I'm going to actually probe a little bit there. I hope I'm within the bounds of the committee when I do that. I think I am, but you can decide afterwards. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have time for questions. So historical overview, patterns that are emerging, what do we do with those patterns, and then questions. And so hang on for the ride. This is a map that I borrowed from John Ruth's The Earth is the Lord's book because it's such a good map. It shows Lancaster County. This is Lancaster County bounded all around here. These are other counties that are now separate counties, but it shows the mountain structures, all these mountains that sort of run southeast to northwest. And the Welsh Mountain is this series of peaks right in here. And so that's important. The geography actually determines the history. And so we have folks living on this side of the mountain, we have folks living on this side of the mountain, and we have the mountains in between. I graduated from Ephrata High School. The mascot of the Ephrata High School is the Ephrata Mountaineer. There's some mountains right here around Ephrata. Of course, if you go to Colorado or Montana and tell them you have mountains in Lancaster County, they'll laugh at you. But it's important to note this. And so I wanted to give credit to John Ruth for, I don't know who actually drew the map, but it's a very good map. So these are the 4 parts we're going to look at. I mentioned that already. Let's go way back to the 1600s and before. There has been human habitation here in this area, the very ground we're sitting on, for thousands and thousands of years. We're going to concentrate on the last 300 and even more so the last 200 and even more so the last 100. But we must not forget that if we were to devote a relative time, we'd have to mostly talk about the Native American inhabitants here if we were to give relative time to the time span. One of the groups that lived here, and there were many, and again, we're skipping over the mountains, the Lenape, some of you know from the English name, the Delaware, and they expanded westward from the Delaware Valley. Some of them would have lived here in Lancaster County. These populations changed over the centuries. They were comings and goings. Most of the Welsh Mountain associations are not so much with the Lenape, but with the Susquehannocks. But the Lenape are a very large historical factor in eastern Pennsylvania that comes up to and including the Welsh Mountain. And just to think a little bit about the religious history of the Lenape, they were deeply religious folks. They had belief in a creator, and they believed that there was life and soul in everything, and that human inhabitation was just one part of the Creator's design. So we can think of that when we see the beauty of the Welsh Mountain, that was appreciated by the inhabitants for many years. The Lenape were inhabitants here of Lancaster County. This is a modern seal for the Delaware or Lenape people. And so you see the mask representing the keeper of the game. You see the various clans. You can see the turkey footprint and the turtle and the wolf clan. And you see because very early on there were some Lenape who were accepting Christianity, so that cross is there as well. Then we have the Susquehannocks. The Susquehannocks Susquehannocks had moved down from New York just before the Europeans arrived and were moving down along the Susquehanna River. The Susquehanna River was an interstate highway for Native American peoples. If you go to the little town of Washington Borough along the Susquehanna River today, there are fewer inhabitants there now than there were 400 years ago. So it's useful to remember that we had a very rich, deep, long history of people who lived here before, people who had developed a system of religious practices. One of the memories of the Susquehannocks, later in their experience, they were called the Conestoga. This is a sign that's along Route 30 over at Gap. And it talks about the Great Minguas Trail. That was a great trading trail that was used by the Native Americans. The Native American influence is with us every day with words that we use and roads that we drive on. Peters Road and the Great Minguas Trail and the road that goes right through New Holland, Route 23. If you get to Gap, you might want to look for this marker. William Penn, of course, is the European who helped to establish the European experience here. He would have liked when the king gave, because of a debt he owed Penn's father, gave him Pennsylvania, he would have liked to call it New Wales. We talk about the Welsh Mountain. The hills of Pennsylvania reminded Penn of Wales, but the king prevailed and he gave it the name of Penn's Woods, where we live today. Let's skip ahead quickly to the 1700s. One of the religious influences that we have here are the Quakers. The Quakers, and William Penn, of course, was a Quaker. We have the Salisbury Meeting House, which I use as kind of a placeholder for Quaker influence around this area here. The Quakers play a prominent role in local history generally and influence some of the roles on the Welsh Mountain as well. This is on Simontown Road over in the Gap area. The Welsh, of course, and we mentioned a bit, we heard some of this last week, came from Wales and points around, but many of them in this area, they were the owners and operators of the forges. So you can go to Pool Forge, which is a beautifully restored. If you've never been to Pool Forge, if you're new to the area here, look it up sometime. It's a beautifully restored estate that goes back into the 1700s, where they were taking iron which was coming from other places up in Cornwall and Hopewell and Joanna furnaces, and they were taking that iron and they were that iron ore and turning it into steel, or iron which could be used, some of it for the American Revolution. We have also right close by, not much of the forge left, but the mansion of the forge owner. Some of you know will know where the little community of Spring Grove, just close to Terry Hill, is. These are all Welsh people who are operating these forges, and whence the name Welsh Mountain comes. There's an old Welsh cemetery. So the local folks, you know where this is. Visitors, you would have to ask someone, but it's on the road from Martindale to Terry Hill, quite an old cemetery. Burials there from 1732 up until 1868. And then we also have this very old Bangor Episcopal Church over in Churchtown, established way back in 1722. This is one of our oldest churches in the area, the earliest burial in the cemetery there in Churchtown. This is established by the Welsh. Now we're putting the roots down with the Welsh, 1741 in the cemetery. But now the story for what happens up on the Welsh Mountain with religious history starts to take shape over with the Peckway Presbyterian Church. This is on Cambridge Road on the south side of the mountain. And this was established very early on as well, 1724. And they come over the mountain to, did I miss a slide? Yeah, okay. Here. They come over the mountain and establish the Cedar Grove Presbyterian Church. Most of you, even if you're new to the area, probably know where this is. It's just down Route 322, just a very short piece from Blue Ball, right at the turn where the main road 897 goes up over the Welsh Mountain. So it's this straddling of the Welsh Mountain by the Presbyterians that sets the stage for what we're going to see unfolding now for the next 200 years here. This church, both of those congregations actually have well-documented histories, and I'm going to just share two little vignettes from this congregation. William Arthur was pastor over at the Peckway, and then he would ride over the mountain to preach at Cedar Grove as well. We're talking about back in the 1700s. One Sabbath morning, and I'll read the story as it's recorded, Reverend William Arthur wished to cross the mountain to preach at the Cedar Grove church. He could not use his own horse on that occasion and consequently obtained the loan of one from the father of William Gate. Mr. Arthur was fond of riding a good horse, and Mr. Gate gave him a spirited animal which was, in former days had been accustomed to the fox chase. As Mr. Arthur was returning in the evening from the church, going over the mountain, he heard the sound of dogs following the trail of the fox. As he began to ascend the mountain, he met the huntsmen, persons from the higher walks of life, waiting for the hounds on the roadside. He rode up to them and began to rebuke them in his decided manner for breaking the Lord's day. At this moment, the hounds took off to the trail past them, and the huntsmen, not relishing the conversation with Reverend Arthur, blew their horns and darted off after their dogs. The horse on which Mr. Arthur rode seemed to have suddenly called to remembrance the scenes of days and other years, and in spite of all the efforts of the rider, leaped after the dogs. A race now ensued through the midst of the dense forest at the imminent risk of fracturing the skull of the rider. After traveling 5 miles in that condition, the horse allowed himself to be reined in. Mr. Arthur now returned to his dwelling exhausted by his ride. A few days later, one of the huntsmen met an elder of the church, and as soon as he came up, he exclaimed, "Your preacher is one of the best riders in this part of the country. Last Sunday, we were out after a fox, and he joined in with us. But he could beat us all. Every leap of the horse was at the heel of the dogs." Those days required decided men to stand forth in defense of the law of God, for wickedness stalked abroad in high and low places. One other little note about Reverend Arthur from the Presbyterians. He was possessed with some glaring eccentricities. Chief among them, he always preached with his gloves on. Another one was his use of snuff. He had a large snuff box which he was accustomed to place on the pulpit beside him during the service. In the midst of the sermon, he would reach for the snuff, and getting his gloved fingers full, instead of applying it to his nose, it mostly fell scattered over the heads and clothes of the clerks sitting at the foot of the pulpit. So, if any of you get to church where the preacher's using snuff, you have some sense of what's going on there. Down at this church, though, there's this date stone. You can see it was built. That's not when they first started meeting, but built. Not that particular building now. The building there, I think, parts of it date to 1927. One of the other kind of interesting historical curiosities, if you drive around and look at some of this stuff, you might want to look at this. This is a big stepping stone that's right at Cedar Grove Presbyterian Church. Obviously, I didn't take the picture. It's not my wife took the picture. But this was to help women step up into the buggy. So the buggies would drive up the men, and women could step up into the buggies. So that's an interesting little tidbit. So now just to review and add a little bit to where we are here in the early 1700s. These are some of the earliest Christian churches in and around the Welsh Mountain. Again, this is not exhaustive, but these would be some of the larger ones that enter into the story, which I'm going to share. Some of them, not all of them do. But we have the Bangor Episcopal Church here in Churchtown. We have the Weaverland Anabaptist Community, which is celebrating 100 years this year, 300 years this year. We have the Salisbury Friends Meeting House, 300 years next year. The Peckway Church of the Brethren, the Peckway Presbyterian Church over in Salisbury we were talking about. And then right here in New Holland, we have a very old congregation, the Trinity Lutheran Church of New Holland. So these are sort of some of the pegs that developed a Christian community tent over the next number of centuries. Let's go to the 1800s now. Here, if we go into the mountain now, the religious and social dynamics over the centuries, and we heard some of this last year, last week. We have these folks who have three races entering together. You have some of these folks who have been escaped slaves. We have folks who may have been released from slavery at some of these forges right in the area. We have folks who are venturing across from the Mason-Dixon line and finding freedom in Pennsylvania, and they're finding their way to the Welsh Mountain. You have remnants of Native Americans, and most of the folks who would identify their Native American heritage would reach back to the Susquehannocks, as we mentioned. And then, of course, there were white populations mixed in. We heard a little bit about the Buzzard family, a white family on the mountain last week. And there were indentured servants who escaped, and this was a hiding place. Because if you look at the old maps, there are very, very few roads that venture into the Welsh Mountain. There's an 1864 map and an 1899 map, very detailed. This was the ethnic experience of many, many, but not all people who were on the mountain. Some of the earliest congregations or church buildings close to the mountain, those of you who are from the local area, you'll know this little white church and a hard S-turn on the south side of the mountain. This goes back into the early 1800s. It's already there on the 1864 map. This is now an evangelical congregational church. It's labeled on the 1864 map as an ME, Methodist Episcopal Church, the father of the Buzzard family, John Buzzard, who died of disease during the Civil War. The Civil War, actually, disease claimed far more folks than the actual war, and he was one of those. You have to wonder the family dynamics there when he died, and all those boys, some of whom didn't turn out too well, but that's where he's buried. Then just up the road from that, and you can do this drive today, is one of the early schools, not the earliest one perhaps, but this is a nice, solid school. It's now a private residence. This is Route 897, just on the south side of the Welsh Mountain. If we go up a little closer into the mountain, we have the St. Peter's Cemetery. This was an African Methodist Episcopal church, and the congregation was active for 50 years, the last half of the 1900s. The building is gone, and there really aren't very many records, but there are some cemetery records here. And in 1849, land had been granted by Peter Watson to the trustees of the African Methodist Church. This is a well-kept cemetery. I think it's on private property, but it's right along the road. Those of you who know the area, those of you who want to learn the area, it's just a little loop road, Hammond Road, that goes off of Pays Road in the mountain there. Very well kept and well documented cemetery, at least. This then is up on top of the mountain. Many of you know Meeting House Road, which is one of the primary roads going out of an intersection up at the top of the mountain. It used to be called hand boards because there were hands pointing in different directions of which place to go. And this building still stands. I think it's now private property. This particular building has a date stone of 1886, but I think there may have been a previous building before that. Quakers were involved here. So this is, I believe, where Meeting House Road likely got its name, because this is right at the beginning of Meeting House Road, Mount Hope Chapel. That figures prominently in the larger story, which comes out in a bit. This is the date stone that's there. And here we are at the cemetery, just beyond the church. This isn't a very good picture, but there are a few stones there. This cemetery, I don't know if it's private property. It's not as well maintained. The last burial here, though, was in 1957. Now we come to some of the people. This is a picture of the man who graduated from Lincoln University and came to the mountain, married a woman from the mountain, and came to the mountain to work with mountain people, was pastor at the Mount Hope Church we had just seen. This is we met him last year, I believe, Melford Hagler. And I don't know exactly who this group is, but this is a group of probably late 1800s. This actually came from Melford Hagler's great-grandson who was here. Carl, are you here tonight? Carl and Grace Sando, are you present? Okay, up there. Okay, thank you for this picture. This was new to me, and maybe new to some of you. And I don't know where you got it, Carl. But yeah, this is your great grandfather, Carl, I believe. Is that correct? Nancy Sando's father. Nancy was your grandmother. Yeah. Okay. I think there are like 4 generations of Melford Higlers, and so this is the first. Now, let's go down off the mountain. We have Melford perched up on the mountain at Mount Hope, and he's working because he's sort of from within the system there. We'll learn a little bit more about who he is and who he was. But let's come down off the mountain, and we have on the north side of the mountain, the Mennonite community is running into some trouble because there's stuff happening that hasn't happened before. They have already been here almost 200 years, and now there's some folks who say, we live in America and we should speak English like everyone else. But all of the theology and all of the songs and all of the old sermons and all of the devotional and prayer books are in German. Some of you were here last year when Amos Hoover and I talked about that, how that shift from German to English actually modified how people think about God, modified theology, and some folks resisted it. And there were some folks who said, look at all this new stuff that's happening around us. The Presbyterians and the Episcopalians and the Baptists, they're having Sunday school, they're having revival meetings, and we're just trudging off to church on Sunday morning and calling it good for a week. And so there was some tension that we want to do like other churches are doing. And then they were building a new church. This was in 1889 over close to Terry Hill, a little back road between Terry Hill and Churchtown. And they're building a new church, and they build it like they always built it. I'm a couple of steps up from you. That is not good Mennonite fashion, because in the kingdom of God, whether we're even called to leadership, we are all the same. We are a brotherhood, a fellowship. We call the leaders from within us. We ordain them by using a system of the lot, and we let God choose. And so they built the new Lichties Church, and then some of the folks building the Lichties Church in 1889, they said, let's do like the other churches do, and they made a raised platform for the preacher. Uh-oh. And some folks were so upset by that they three youngsters from one family went in over the transom, the window at the top of the door one night, and they tore out that raised pulpit, and they put a table on the floor like Mennonite churches are supposed to have. You know, that festered for decades and decades and decades. It was kind of the first visible split in the Mennonite community north of the Welsh Mountain that led in 1893 to an actual division. That's why you have people who are Mennonites who are driving cars back and forth on Route 23 here, and that's why you have people who are Mennonites driving buggies on Route 23 here, because of this split which happened here on the north side of the Welsh Mountain. So let's look at a few pictures. This is a Lichties Mennonite church. Not a great picture, but it's an old picture. It doesn't look quite like that, although it's not much different. They've sandblasted it, and the beautiful stone is visible now. And this is the church that the folks who said we're not. Their bishop actually here at the Weaverland Church got cast out of the local Mennonite conference because he talked so strongly for the old ways. And he went with his group up the hill from the Weaverland Church. That's a brick church there. And in 1894, they built another church there. So if you go in the Weaverland area, there will people who will talk about the Weaverland Lower Church, the older one down at the bottom of the hill, and the upper church that they built right next to a pre-existing cemetery. But that fracture is with us to this day yet. In fact, that's one of the topics that Karen was talking about, that turquoise card of historical topics. This very topic is one of the things that's going to be discussed in April, I believe it is. One of the things that really held the attention of Mennonites and Amish in Lancaster County and elsewhere is this very old book from the 1660s, printed in Europe, and then reprinted, translated to German here at the Erfurter Cloister in 1748. It's The Martyr's Mirror. It shows how we live in the world, but the world will never accept us, and it's a story of brutality against Anabaptist Christians and others in Europe. And so this separation from the world is a very, very strong sentiment within Mennonite populations in the 1890s. And other folks say, but there's a lot of good stuff. There's Sunday school, but that's worldly. Well, we could worship in language, but look what we lose. We could turn lights on at church and we could have a rousing revival meeting. That's not the way we do it. And so it was a very, very strong point of tension. And so this division occurs. And now on the north side of the mountain, there is a group of more conservative Mennonites and a group ready to try some new stuff. In that time, the larger Mennonite community on both sides of the mountain would have had an understanding that at a fairly advanced level, we all do all things the same. In other words, if a church practice was okay on the north side, it was also okay on the south side. And now that the conservative folks, many of whom are on the north side, have hived off and identified their own group, now there's some liberalizing trends that are seeping back around to the south side of the mountain, and there some folks are starting to get some new ideas. On the south side of the mountain, they are starting to read about and think about and learn about what's going on up on the Welsh Mountain. And one of the things that the Mennonites on both sides of the mountains are reading is from the Lancaster newspaper at the time, the Lancaster Examiner in 1893. And here's a description, not a flattering description at all, of a newspaper reporter of Welsh Mountain people coming to markets. The wagon looks as if it's been made out of the shreds and patches of a wagon maker's shop. No two wheels are alike. The horse is blind in both eyes. His harness was probably made up of scraps and borrowings of sundry saddlery shops. It looks as if the occupants of the wagon should haul the horse and not the contrary. So that is sort of, shall we say, a non-church perspective of seeing these people who are coming to the market. But then in the church setting itself, we're talking the Mennonites now. This is what John Buckwalter has to say. He says, we turn to the middle ground on the east between these valleys, and we see scenes, the beautiful Welsh mountain, peopled with the people of both black and white races, of whom it can truly be said, as the Lord said of the Ninevites, that they cannot discern between the right hand and the left. And what have we as a church done to save them? Practically nothing. The temporal, moral, and spiritual condition of these mountain peoples is a standing, living, mocking shame to our religion. They have been released by the separation to the north, and now the south says, we are going to do some new things. It's strong language there, strong language, but this is a quote from John Buckwalter. And so they start organizing. In 1894, on the south side of the mountain, those of you who know where the Vintage Sales Stables is, you just come up with a little rise this way from Vintage Sales Stables. There's Harristown, and there's an Amish farm there, the farmhouse of John Mellinger in 1894. This group of Mennonite men are meeting, and they want to do something about reaching out to the community. And so they formed a group, they call it the Home Missions Advocates. But the church leadership was still remembering the old way of doing things, and they were not ready to bless the church. The church was not ready to bless the Home Mission Advocates. And so the group disbanded, and the next year they reformed again. And Sunday schools had already been creeping into some of these Mennonite congregations, so they knew that Sunday schools were basically okay. So they kept basically the same vision, but they gave it a new name, and it was the Mennonite Sunday school mission instead of the mission advocates. And then the bishops who were sympathetic to it had cover because this was basically Sunday school activity, and then it was okay. So we now have the division to the north among the Mennonites in the 1890s. We have the folks on the south starting to think new thoughts, and now they want to come together on the mountain and work together. And that's what's happening here. So we have on the north and the south coming together. This was a Sunday school mission, the Redwell Schoolhouse. It's no longer standing. I think this was at the intersection. And I would just say, on any of this stuff, I would very much welcome corrections and comments when we're done, because I'm learning this stuff myself. But I think this was at the intersection of Pays Road and Dean Road. Those of you who know the area, the site of the Redwell Schoolhouse. That area is called Redwell. And in 1897, this relatively newly formed Mennonite Sunday School missions were having their quarterly meeting there. And wouldn't you know that they get a visitor. There's a guy from the mountain named Reverend Milford Hagler. He visits this quarterly meeting at the Redwell School. He asked the Mennonites for financial, moral, and Christian support. He addressed the group in such ringing eloquence as to carry the whole congregation with him to laughter, to tears, and to final action. And so we have this man who had connections with the Presbyterians coming to the Mennonites and saying, will you help us? Will you help us with this? There was the extreme poverty which was going on. These freed slaves, some of whom perhaps had worked for the forges. One account says that the freedmen moved onto patches of ground, plots of ground that had been deforested by the forges, and by the forge owners. They were granted right to live on this land, but they were unable to make a living from this the poor soil. And when Mr. Hagler was invited to speak at this group, he just made clear to the Mennonites how difficult it was up on the mountain. I'm going to digress just slightly here while we're in the Redwell area. We're at the Redwell School now. The Mennonites are meeting with their missions group, and Reverend Hagler is visiting with them. But while we're in the neighborhood, let's go over to this privately, I think this is private property, but it's well maintained. This is a burial ground associated with the Redwell community. 7 of the 16 graves that at least their information has been preserved are of the Buzzard family. This is right along Redwell Road, just north of Peters Road, just like the second house as you come up Peters Road. It's in their backyard. They said they mow the yard, they take care of it, and one of the folks who's buried there is the oldest son of John and Mary Ann Buzzard, and this is Martin Buzzard. And so there's something I want to specifically point out here, because we're going to come back to it. That's if I remember. So it tells a little bit about this. This is Martin Buzzard. This is his death certificate, and it's not all there. Some of it is cut off, but you'll see. Let's see if we can pick this out here. One of the things I want to point out here is his father is John Buzzard. His mother down here is Mary Glauner. Mary Glauner is the mother to the Buzzard boys. Okay? Keep that in mind. We're going to come back to that. This is the Melford Hagler we're talking about, Carl Sando's great-grandfather. He provided this link between the mountain and the Mennonites in the valley. He provided the link from what had been the existence of the Mount Hope Chapel, the other churches that were there in the late 1800s. And invited people into the 20th century. So this is a key player in both the religious connection and the span from sort of, shall we say, traditional life of the 19th century into modern life of the 20th century. If we were to think about a single individual who probably impacted the trajectory of the religious life on the Welsh Mountain, this would be the man I would nominate. He's buried over, interestingly, at the Peckway Cemetery. A lot of the cemeteries were segregated at this time. He was mixed race. His father was white and his mother was black, but then he married Mary Ellen Marshall of the Welsh Mountain, and she had white, black, and Native history. Paul Marshall was here last week. I think he's here again this week. Maybe this is a relative of his because he also is from the Welsh Mountain. He was pastor at this Mount Hope, a graduate of the first historic black college that was a degree-granting institution, Lincoln University, just in neighboring Chester County. His daughter, Nancy Hagler Sandeau, we talked about her last week, the Welsh Mountain Clinic, dental clinic. And so this is over at the Peckway Cemetery. Let's go into the 1900s now with Malfred Hagler. This is a program of the meeting of this Mennonite Sunday school mission, and this is 1900 now. They formed, they got an invitation from Malfred Hagler, and now they're working, and I hope you note on the program down here a report of the Welsh Mountain Industrial Mission. So here they're meeting over in Kinser's, probably what was the Kinser Mennonite Church. It's now used by another group, but I would imagine that that's where they were meeting. And the Mennonite man who helped this to happen was a very ambitious, successful man, Samuel, and his wife, now here with his wife Anna, Samuel Musselman, and he was a driver of this vision that the Mennonites had, what they might do up on the mountain. And here's a picture of a gathering. I'm not sure if this actually came from you, Carl, but you would certainly know about this picture. And I think, do we have? Yeah, I think if I'm seeing this correctly, this I think is Sam Musselman here, and I think this is Reverend Hagler. I'm not 100% sure about these, but that would be what I'm guessing. Musselman is correct. Okay. Here they're gathering to break ground for this new lot of what they're planning to do. There's a written description of this activity. The men work in gangs. One lot with grubbing hose clearing away smaller stumps and stones. Another lot operates the stump machine. The rest were picking up and hauling off rubbish. Men are good workers and seem to enjoy their work. They are building an industrial mission up just near the top of the mountain, near where those hand boards were. And this is the goal of what they hope to operate here. Having a store, they'll have a school, they're going to weave carpets, they're going to make shirts, they're going to manufacture brooms, produce strawberries and cabbage, and they're going to preach the gospel. Here's a business card from early on when Noah Mack was one of the superintendents. He was the first superintendent, I think. This is from 1903. I think there's a receipt of some sort on the table here from last week of some of the work that was done there. This is the industrial mission. And here you see some of the folks in front of the shirt factory in 1912. This building is still there. It is now the Mennonite church that is at the top of the mountain. I'm borrowing significantly for some of these pictures from the story of the Welsh Mountain 100 years ago. Henry Benner, somebody mentioned this last week. The book is over here if you'd like to take a closer look. This is Elmer Boots, the first mountain resident to be baptized into the Mennonite church. The Mennonites were still learning what to do with people of a different race. Do you see what's happened now that that's sort of the colloquial definition of what it means to be Mennonite, that it's culturally and ethnically bound, that has been shed with a division from the old order, and now you can actually have people who look very different than yourself and they can still be Mennonites. That was a huge leap to say that it's no longer an ethnic definition. But the Mennonites weren't quite sure what to do with that. And so these folks, Elmer was baptized, there were other folks coming to the church, and they designated them a colored Mennonite congregation. Elmer Boots here is in the 1912 picture in the basement of what is today the Welsh Mountain Church. It was then the broom factory. Now, that question about what does it mean to integrate a Mennonite church had already been answered. Cloyd Carter, of all places out in rural Juniata County, there had been revival meetings, and a bunch of people came as baptismal applicants, and Cloyd Carter and his parents black people, African American people, came to be baptized, and they were. Cloyd and his family attended the Lost Creek Mennonite Church. Those of you who know Juniata County, the meetings were held at the nearby Lawver Mennonite Church. If you go there, you can go out along the back fence and you can find Cloyd's tombstone. So the question had been answered. It is possible that we can integrate races into these what had been white, Swiss, German, Mennonite churches up until that point. This served the church very well when it came to answer the question just 2 decades later, can Tanzanians also be Mennonites? And the answer was already answered with Elmer Boots and Cloyd Carter and his parents, and the Tanzanian Mennonite Church became a Tanzanian Mennonite Church. Just parenthetically, the largest Mennonite church in the world today is in Ethiopia. Here is the death certificate of this Elmer Boots we were talking about. Just some interesting information. Let's look at this. His occupation: agriculture and broom making. Some very common names. His mother was is this his mother? I think Mary Book here. Arthur Boots was his father. His mother was Martha Green. Green is a very common Welsh Mountain name, still there today. And now some pictures, many of these coming from the 100th anniversary book. Some of you remember Isaac Boots, some of you local folks. Here he's in a tomato field. This picture isn't from 1905, I don't think, but in 1905 it was sort of a record-breaking year. Can you imagine picking 425 bushels of strawberries? I can't imagine that. I'm sure they had lots of help, but these are some of the pictures from that time. Here's Isaac Boots again with his great-grandsons. Here's Martha Smith, and these are folks from the mountain. And a well-known historian, it became sort of the historian of his generation among the Mennonites, M.G. Weaver, Martin G. Weaver. He was watching all of this in 1911. Now we've been going for a little more than a decade. And he is giving a prophetic word here. He says, it will be but a few years when the Welsh Mountain will have entirely lost its former characteristics and be a settlement like any other busy farming section of the Conestoga Valley. But with colored folks as owners of the farms, there are already a number on the mountain who own homes, who have spans of mules, and who look for a few acres of their own land. What a rosy picture. The Mennonites have come, and it is making a big, big difference. And then there's a tragedy. Lancaster newspaper, a couple of weeks after it happened, 1924, Arthur Moyer, the superintendent of the mission, hears some rattling around, as he does from time to time, out at his corn crib. January 25, 1924, goes out with a flashlight to see who it is, and he receives 4 shots. One of them, 24 hours later, proved fatal. He was praying and giving a testimony of his faith in the 24 hours that he survived in pain from his gunshot wounds, but he did die. And it was kind of a shocking tragedy. There were times already that things were declining by 1924. I think the shirt factory had already closed. It was not going well. This is what the reporter on this newspaper, you can't read it unfortunately at all. But again, I apologize that this language violates the kind of language we would use today, but I'm showing you what the sentiment of the general public, this is not the Mennonites now, this is the newspaper reporter writing from this newspaper, describes the Welsh Mountain Mennonites as people who beg what they can and steal the rest. And then he talks about the Mennonites. A light in the mountains flickers and grows dim, a guiding ray that for 25 years has flared forth as a beacon, only to fade again in a dim glow, ebbing away, talking about this tragedy. The work of the industrial mission, the writer notes, seems like a hopeless task. Its work has met with indifferent regard by the lawless element that infests the hills. This is what this general public sentiment is. To the visitor, it seems barely conceivable that conditions such as this can be found on the mountain today, that it can exist in the heart of the highly civilized Lancaster County. You can go to the Groffdale Mennonite Church close by here, and you can see Arthur Moyer's tombstone, 1924. His widow lived for quite a long time after after that actually stayed working at the Welsh Mountain home after Arthur was killed. Went to visit Arthur Boots, who was indicted, tried, and convicted of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 20 years in the Eastern Penitentiary. Mrs. Moyer asked him, "Why did you shoot my husband?" He said, "I didn't." So that's what we know about that. Now, here's where I'm going to do a little digression. This is not a major part of the story, but this is a new piece to me. This assignment here helped me to figure out this piece. I should just say on this slide, we're now declining. The industrial mission is in fact closed by the powers that be governing it, and it becomes just a mission and a home to take folks, elderly and so forth. This family, this is a picture before he was at Welsh Mountain, and this is a picture of his family afterwards. I have no photographs that I have access to of my grandparents, my mother's parents. John Burkholder was baptized at Weaverland, and then he married in late 1923. In 1924, after Arthur Moyer murder, he moved to Welsh Mountain with his bride. I don't think they had any children yet. This is a later picture. This is my mother here before she's married. So I learned that my family has a direct link to this story here in Lancaster. Susie, I see you're here. You helped me discover this. The other thing that you should know is that my grandfather, John Burkholder, used to kind of poke a little bit at his beloved wife, and he would say, "You know that Mrs. Buzzard, her maiden name was Glauner. Do you know what the maiden name of your grandmother was that lived in this area? Her name was Glauner. And so do you know that you were a relative of the Buzzards?" My grandmother never quite accepted that. The genealogical record gets really thin as you get back into the early 1800s, so I don't actually know how closely they're related, but almost certainly from the same area, the same name. The Buzzards coming from Mother Glauner, and the family that descends from the grandmother whose name was Glauner are relatives. So if there's some reason you want to think that I may have Buzzard blood, you're welcome to do so. So they established the Welsh Mountain Home, started in 1924 after Arthur Moyer's death. And it's been governed by the Welsh Mountain Board, by the Eastern Mennonite Missions, by 6 local church districts. More recently, this has been enveloped by the Landis communities, Landis Homes, and so Landis Homes now is the governing authority of the Welsh Mountain Home. And out of that comes, forming separately from the home in 1938, the Welsh Mountain Mennonite Church. And this is the community youth here in the 1940s on the porch of the church. A couple of folks, some of these may have lived on the mountain, many of them didn't. Ira and Pauline Buckwalder served on the mountain there, pastored at the church. We have the Lehman family, Clayton and Esther Lehman, very active folks on the Welsh Mountain. Again, borrowing this from the 100-year book. This is another picture I put in simply because it comes into my family. My dear wife Karen is sitting over here. This is her father right here. This family, Daniel and Marion Weaver, were very active in the Welsh Mountain. The only living person on this picture in the local area is Richard Weaver, a retired surgeon from Wellspan, Ephrata. Some of you might know Richard. They lived in Blue Ball and had the Weaver, then later Provident bookstore, and behind the bookstore was a saddle shop where Grandpa Weaver had his saddlery business. So some of you will remember that. So this is a very strong tie in my family to the Welsh Mountain. My wife remembers going there frequently, and then she saw the picture of the children on the porch. She said, "Oh yeah, I remember the porch at the Welsh Mountain Church." John and Dorothy Hershey, another very active family in Welsh Mountain. And again, I'm skipping over. There'll be many others we could talk about. This is the Mountain Springs Mennonite Church now. This congregation chose to go with a more conservative group of Mennonites called the Biblical Mennonite Alliance. And so they join a number of other churches. Some of you would know Millwood, and some of you would know the newly formed Heritage Church. This is a group of more conservative Mennonites. So if you go to the Welsh Mountain Church today, they will be gathering as a group of folks who still find significant value in plain expressions of being church. This is not a great picture, but this is the Mountain Springs or the Mountain Springs Church on the left, and a portion of the home on the right. Across the road, nice new Mountain View Terrace. This is part of the home. This is a legacy of this Welsh Mountain mission. Just to mention, and again, this isn't exhausted, down the hill we have the Cedar Lane Chapel. We have a Pilgrim Church up on Page Road there. But let's keep going here. And look, I want to now look at some of the patterns. And this is the connection here between faith and what we have witnessed. Faith gives rise to values, things that we think are important, and then values show us how we should act. I mean, some of the things we've talked about, what people did here, the church division, that's based on the values. And then actions or inactions bring results. And so let's just look at patterns. One of the patterns I want us to think about is, whose land is this? And more recently, people have been discussing more and more this doctrine of discovery, which was a Christian decision in Europe in the 1400s that gave legal permission for Christian governments to have rights over the land and people of the heathens. And so when Columbus, as a Catholic, is planting his flag, then he and the king he represents has a right to dominion over the land, over the resources, over the people. Whose land is this? Those of us who learned that Columbus discovered America in 1492, you've heard many times since then, there were already people here. This is what happened to the Lenape after the Europeans started moving in here in the east. They just moved westward, sometimes of their choice, more often pushed because of elements close by. So this is where the Lenape people have moved across the United States. There are still Lenape identified tribes elsewhere. Pennsylvania is one of the dozen states that has no federally recognized tribes, federally recognized. So we're in a land that is not giving any legal recognition to the thousands and thousands of years of human habitation. This is what one Lenape leader, I think in Oklahoma, says. He says, "It's a history of deprivations, of swindles, of murders, of dishonorable behavior by the Dutch, by the British, and later by the Americans. We have been our way from our homeland since that time, and yet we have preserved and managed to organize and reassemble ourselves." And he says, "We just want to be welcomed back." Well, that's a pattern. Whose land is this? I had a local state representative right in this area who wrote an email to me 5 years ago, and he said, "I'd like to sit with someone to talk about how we think about the Native Americans who were here before the Europeans." I went and met with him, and we talked about it, and it became pretty obvious to him that this is really complicated story. He wanted to quickly move through, it seemed, and pass a state resolution of some kind of acknowledgement that people used to live here before. Until our conversation was done, I think he thought, "I don't have time for this," and I never heard from him again. John Ruth is a well-respected Mennonite historian just a bit east of us here. And he's an old man now, has told many, many stories. And I think it's this is my impression, it's an exercise of his conscience that he says, "I have told stories for many, many years, but I have not acknowledged the folks who have lived here for a very long time." He says, "Shouldn't the descendants of a people who, having fled their own homelessness and supplanted others on the earth," he's talking about the refugees coming here, my family, many of our families, supplanted others on the earth that is the Lord's, hear more of the story of those they displaced. Whose land is this? Changing demographics. Some of the legacy families remain on the Welsh Mountain, but it's continuing to change, and it has dramatically changed in recent decades within my memories. This is a Green family. They resisted the gentrification on all sides. Benny Green died 2 weeks ago, and so now this is going to change too, I presume. How did it change? I circled in around today at Shady Lane on the Beartown Hill. This house is for sale for $550,000, 1.17 acres. Look it up online if you're interested in buying a $500,000 house. That's what's changing. Whose land is this? Whose story is this? Much of the Welsh Mountain story written and told by observers, not the indigenous residents. So we have newspaper articles, we have church periodicals, we have books, we have oral tradition. Very little of it comes from on the mountain itself. I would mention, there are some, but I would mention two exceptions. Well, I should even just say this first of all. Even the Mennonites who thought they were doing good work, they were in charge of everything. Leadership almost entirely from the dominant white culture. There might be one or two exceptions there, and there's very limited evidence of partnership. You notice sort of the us and them language, shall we say, we are reaching down to help you. Is that too strong language? So this dominant story comes from the valleys on each side, or from the newspaper reporters in Lancaster, and the non-dominant perspective of the folks who lived on the mountain has largely, I'm afraid to say, it may almost be lost. We do have a few. This one isn't a terribly good example. Now, this is a paperback book. It's open, so on the left you have the back cover, and the right is the front cover. This is available at the Mennonite Life, formerly Lancaster Mennonite Historical Society. An interesting book, an 1897 book by Isaac Buzzard. How do you like this for a title? The Criminal Life of Isaac M. Buzzard, a true and complete story of his life from boyhood to the present day, 1897. And he is in some ways feeding into the narrative because he's saying, look how bad we are. And so in some ways, that's not been a helpful on-mountain perspective. This one, although Anita could have benefited grandly by a good editor, but this one is a story that from the Welsh Mountain families, she doesn't live there now, but she is writing about her family, the Black Mingwa, the Black Indians, shall we say. Mingwa was a name the Lenape gave the Susquehannocks. It means treacherous. That's how the Lenape saw the Susquehannocks. Anita Wills, a great-great-granddaughter of Henry Green, recounts his life and times. And Henry Green is from the Welsh Mountain. When the narratives are told, we don't hear the stories of them trying to make a positive difference. 1850, the Fugitive Slave Law Act of the United States Congress permitted slave owners from slave-holding states to go to other places where slaves were not, where slaves were not enforced as it was in the South, and recapture their slaves. So we have Edward Gorsuch following 4 of his slaves to nearby eastern Lancaster County, Christiana, and they're finding refuge in the home of William Parker. And Henry Green from the Welsh Mountain is there, and it's quite a confrontation. Edward Gorsuch says, "I will have my property," his 4 slaves in that house, and he pursued it to the extent that he lost his life. But these were folks who were acting on values, saying to own another person, to own a person is wrong. That's a story from the Welsh Mountain values coming out to play. Henry Green also served in the Civil War. And so again, some of us may or may not agree with that, but he was acting on the values that he held dear. Values cultivated in the Welsh Mountain. He's buried at the Ashbury Methodist Cemetery over again. We're in Simontown Road, and you can see his grave there. This is the cemetery. Anita Will writes, "This is how people, because of the lessons that were learned over the years, people looking at the mountain, those people had no right to exist. The justification used that they were no accounts lawless and thieves who stole chickens." And then she pokes. "They were not to be confused with the European thieves who stole native lands and African labor." Whose future is this? Do we welcome new understandings? This summer, I invited a black couple from Tanzania to live with an Amish family on Meeting House Road, just down over the Welsh Mountain. They were working on perfecting a traditional a traditional plow, turning it into a no-till planter, working with Amish machine shops, Peckway Planter and Whitehorse Machine. Anyway, Harry and Naomi were walking along Route 340, going to the thrift shop right along 340 in Whitehorse. And they came face to face. A guy driving along 340 rolled down his window and shouted nasty, nasty racist words at them. They come from Tanzania, where almost everyone is black. They did not understand what this was. This is in our community. Whose future is this? Can we visualize something different? Can we have a day when we don't have that on Whitehorse? Martin Luther King gives us some instructions there. What does it mean today? I want to commend this institution for a racial literacy committee. This is a start. This is where we start. There are resources here for us to understand this picture better. There are no federally recognized tribes in Pennsylvania, but we do have a local Indian group, Native American Indian, the Legacy Circle. My friend Mary Ann Robbins here has an interesting job. I think she still has that job. She's a liaison for Welsh Band Ephrata Hospital for the Plain community. She helps the Mennonites and Amish driving buggies into the hospital there to get the best cash deal they can for health care. But we have issues right here. Some of you will remember this. This is private property where the Susquehannocks have an oral tradition of having buried some of their dead ones, and the landowner came out and said, I will farm over this. And so there was a strong resistance, but there was nothing to do. There's nothing to be done in Pennsylvania if it's on private property. And so these are things that linger with us today. We can read about some of these kinds of things. Where are the forces that we see around us? Where can we learn alternative views? Jamar Tisby, The Color of Compromise, a strong indictment of the American church. Good people who somehow lost their way in finding the trueness of God made and loves all people. We can come into our own neighborhood here, Messiah University. My friend Drew Hart, writing Trouble I've Seen. Again, how does the church look at some of these things differently now? If you really want to be discomfited, some of you might want to, this would cost you a little money, but there's an intercultural development continuum that helps you assess through a series of 50 questions where you are in your views of others and races. And I would guarantee that most of you here would be uncomfortable with the results, even though this has been strongly tested for validity and dependability. I have worked at this for years and years and years, and I'm still just in here sort of barely finding my way. I still try to minimize the tensions between different races and people. I thought I should be way over here. I've worked at this for decades. I shouldn't tell you that. So anyway, there's where we are. It's a long journey, and we only skimmed the top, and we do need to wrap up soon. But I want questions, comments, corrections, observations. What do you have to say? Or did I exhaust you? Yeah, Benny Green just died on February 6th. Yeah, and so that's sort of the end of sort of the traditional. I'm sorry? He's still living there. No, he's not living there now. Now he was when I visited on January 26th, but he's not there now. Yeah. Is that right? Now, there was no obituary in the newspaper. I mean, that tells you, huge cultural differences going on. Yeah. Yes, comment, please.
Recently at the Zimmerman Center in Wrightsville,
Mm-hmm.
they paint a very interesting picture of Indian life.
Yeah, do you want to use the microphone? Yeah.
I'd rather not if you
Well, there are people online, yeah.
Okay, excuse me.
Yeah.
I'll reach
If you don't mind.
Thank you. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. The Zimmerman Center in Wrightsville.
Yeah, it was just very interesting the way they described Indian life, that men and women in the Susquehannock tribe were very much equal. And women had as much say as men, perhaps more.
Interesting.
And the way families were raised.
So this is just on the other side of the Susquehanna River. There's a Zimmerman Center you're talking
Right
about.
across from Washington Borough.
Right across from Washington.
And then additionally, they indicated that their structure of perhaps the Susquehannock later, when they affiliated more perhaps with the Iroquois nation, that served as a model for the 13 colonies. So that interpretation at the Zimmerman Center left me feeling very good.
Yeah.
And there was just there on the property remnants of an old Indian village, and again, they said that those cultures just kind of melted into what seemed like this story. Perhaps the Welsh Mountain is where
Interesting.
those people wound up.
Yeah, yeah.
Just a curiosity.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, the Zimmerman Center is a worthwhile place to visit. There's a lot of Native American stuff on both sides of the Susquehanna River, just right here, Lancaster County and York County. Yeah. Other comments, questions, corrections? Okay, the medical center, dental center. Is it the medical center, or is it mostly dental work?
It's medical now.
Medical
Again,
and dental.
They moved back into the same
Yeah.
building.
Okay, the comment was about the medical center, which was part of, well, Nancy Sandeau's work, Milford Hagler's daughter, that it had closed. I think they had work down here in New Holland, and then yeah. The interesting question is, both with the home and with the medical center, that the first rationale for their existence has sort of changed. I mean, it's not the population to serve there, which it once was, and so that's an interesting development. Yes, yeah. Other questions, comments? I know there's some experts among you. We can field corrections too. Yeah, yeah. Well, I would send you off by saying, enjoy the history which is there, but do claim it to say there is probably something that we could still do to push out our understanding and our own response to that, and make the world a better place as we leave it than it was when we arrived. And so go with God's blessing. Thank you for coming tonight. A few books here that talk about some of this stuff. You'll feel free to peruse them if you like. Yeah.